we've heard quite a bit about the impact of Greek speakers and Greek culture on the native populations, but another side of this project is to look at the impact on Greek itself of its long-term presence in Italy. In recent years, there's been quite a lot of work on Sicilian Greek, and we're quite well informed now about the overall situation there, not just in the earliest periods, but right through into Hellenistic and Roman times. That's simply not the case for South Italy. So what I'd like to do in my very brief talk, I don't plan to keep you from your drinks for very long, is just to outline a possible set of research agendas. First, though, a little tiny bit of background, mainly for those who aren't familiar with the Greek historical and cultural context. The 8th century BC marks a period of very active colonization from mainland Greece, and a lot of cities started to colonize the coastlines of Sicily and southern Italy, and the whole region came to be called Megale Hellas, or in Latin subsequently Magna Graecia, large, big Greece. And these are the Greek colonies of ancient Campania, Lucania, Bruttium, Apulia, Calabria. The modern names, unfortunately, don't always correspond terribly well, and it can be confusing. I think Calabria, in particular, seems to have moved from the heel to the toe. Some people also use Magna Graecia to include Sicily. That's a matter of choice. I'll use it here simply to talk about southern Italy. Most people are aware that ancient Greece, before the rise of Macedonia in the 4th century BC, was a politically fragmented place. And one consequence of that is that each city was effectively an autonomous state that used official versions of its own dialect for the conduct of its business. And we therefore know quite a lot about ancient Greek dialectology, far more really than we know about almost any other ancient language. And naturally enough, when the colonization process took place, the colonists took their local dialects with them. So I apologize for the quality of the map on page 1. It looked great in color, but it's not really come out terribly well in black and white. But this is simply so that you can identify regions of old Greece, and then very inconveniently on the other page, you can see colonies in South Italy. Now, broadly speaking, we've heard that there are two major groups of colonies, Ionian colonies and Dorian colonies. These simply reflect supposedly ethnic divisions which the ancient Greeks themselves recognized. The Ionian colonies are principally from the island of Euboea, which you can see here on the map, just alongside the coast of Attica, but also a few from Ionic-speaking areas much further east and off the map. Most important are Cumae and Pithecusae, or Ischia, and then locally founded from those areas other places like Naples and Rhegium and Messina and so on. Another important set of colonies, these are the ones from farther east, are Elea, which you can see over the page, just south of the Bay of Naples, and Ceres, right in the middle here of the Bay of Taranto, between the sort of sole and the heel. These are a minority, really, in terms of the bigger picture in South Italy. The vast majority of the colonies, apart from those around the Bay of Naples, are so-called Dorian colonies, and they come from two different, or even three different areas of Old Greece. The most important set in terms of numbers are the so-called Achaean colonies. Now, if you look at the map on the first page. Achaia is a region of the northern Peloponnese, just here, central northern Peloponnese, and quite a lot of colonies, allegedly, traditionally, are of Achaean origin. So really quite important places like Croton, Metapontum, Sybaris, and then locally founded other places from those original Achaean colonies. Alongside those, there's a very important colony of Tarentum, which you can see over the page, in the Salento region of modern Italy, okay, in the heel, which was the city of Sparta's only foreign colony. So Sparta is in the region on this map in the Peloponnese called Laconia. So a Laconian dialect exported to Tarentum, and then the important town of Heraclea, founded from Tarentum inter alia. And then finally the third group, this is from so-called northwestern Greece. It's actually from the region called Locris. So here is the Corinthian Gulf, okay, separating the Peloponnese from the rest of the mainland. And if you look just north of the Corinthian Gulf, you'll see two areas called Locris, east and west Locris. The people there sent a colony to South Italy, and it's called Locri, or Locri Epizephyrii, the ones under the west wind, and that is right here on the toe of Italy, if you look at the map on the other page. Now, of course, this is a very, very simplistic picture, because even if initially the groups of people spoke one particular dialect when they moved to South Italy, there was subsequently a great deal of movement and displacement of populations, both internally motivated by the Greek communities and also externally motivated by hostile relationships with local populations. So in 9 on the handout, I've just listed a few examples of colonies that change their character over time. And of course, there are other places, for example, Metapontum, which is here in the Bay of Taranto, was captured by Oscan-speaking Lucanians early in the 4th century, and the population partly dispersed. So I think when you're looking at the dialect situation in South Italy, very quickly after the initial phases of colonization, you start to get population mixture and therefore dialect mixture. And we know for sure that in Sicily, as a result of all of this, the Ionic dialect effectively disappeared, and Doric dialects over time encroached and then replaced it. And presumably, similar situation applied in South Italy. We know in some cases that it definitely did. For example, Syris, which you can see in the Bay of Taranto there, became over time the port of Heraclea, and Heraclea was always a Doric-speaking place, so presumably the Ionic speakers of Syris were simply absorbed into and stopped speaking over time their original Ionian dialect. Alongside all of that, I think it's worth bearing in mind too that these cities weren't all of equal size and importance. In Sicily, by far the most important town was Syracuse, and in Sicily there is good evidence over time of the dialect of Syracuse forming the basis for some kind of local Koinization process, so that the local dialects start to look more like Syracusan. We might expect the same thing to happen in South Italy, particularly in connection with the dialect of Tarentum. It was by the late 5th century, 4th century, early 4th century BC, the main port and the most important military power in the region. It had hugely enhanced local status as a result, and you might expect greater prestige, therefore, for its dialect, and for that dialect to start to form the basis for some kind of regional standard, perhaps, over time. Well, that's the background. In section C, I've simply made a list of some existing resources. I won't go through this. You'll see that principally the work on this region has been done by Italians and Spaniards, and the emphasis really traditionally and throughout has been on the archaic and classical periods, the 8th, 7th and 6th centuries, perhaps the 5th as well. Mainly, I think, for a number of, well, two reasons. The first is that some of the earliest examples of alphabetic Greek epigraphically come from this region, the Bay of Naples area. And because people traditionally, at least, who are interested in Greek dialectology, are interested in the ancient dialects before Koineization processes. They're interested in, as it were, the original dialects as they see it, rather than dialects affected by larger political connections of various kinds. One of the issues that arises then is that there is as yet no systematic collection of the Greek materials from the Hellenistic and Roman periods for this region, and that's a huge desideratum, I think. Well, some people have tried to sketch a bigger picture of what's going on with Greek in this region, beyond, including, but also beyond the classical period. And the two principal players here are Consani and Bartoniek. Unfortunately, they've suggested sort of plausible-ish scenarios, but without ever offering a huge amount of supporting evidence and analysis. So in 14, I've just listed a few things which they've identified as possible or probable, but which are really still very much in need of further investigation in the light of a proper collection of the available stuff. So first of all, the spread of Tarentine at the expense of other forms of Doric in classical times. Did that really happen? Was Tarentine in due course the basis for a much more general koinar, let's do it in Doric dialect, in Hellenistic and Romans, that served as a time for local purposes as a rival to the koiner, standard form that you're familiar with an E, which was associated with the rise of Macedonia and the spread of Greek culture right through the Eastern Mediterranean through Alexander's conquests. The speakers of Doric dialects certainly felt a great pride in their own culture and traditions, and there's evidence elsewhere in the Greek-speaking world that as the Koine, which is actually based on the dialect of Athens, started to spread and become standard, the Dorian regions resisted this more vigorously than most. So you might expect in this region of South Italy, where Dorian is very well rooted, that the locals would try to form some kind of Doric-based koine, koinar, rather than simply succumb immediately to the spread of the international standard. An interesting possibility also raised is slightly counterintuitive, but I suppose not impossible. The idea that Bartoniek and Consani both put forward is that the international standard, the koine, based on the dialect of Athens as spread by the Macedonians, infiltrates South Italian Doric from the bottom up, not from the top down. The argument would be then that the koinar, which they want to believe existed, was a reflection of upper-class Dorian pride and Dorian consciousness, and they draw attention to things like the Neo-Pythagorean literature from the 5th and 4th centuries BC down into possibly Roman imperial times, and there are significant fragments of this stuff, Philolaus, Archytas, and some probably pseudo-letters of Pythagorean women. Maybe. And there are also, not many, but a few private documents which suggest imperfect learning of Greek by Oscan speakers, and I've put one of these up on the board. There are certain weird things here. For example, these eaters, this should represent a combination of short and long E vowels, so it should be ke, but it's written consistently with eaters. This insensitivity to vowel length may well be something to do with Oscan. We've also got here, or perhaps I should mention something else about this word. It seems to mean this guy made the crown, okay, and it's an inscription on a gold crown. This verb in Greek means put. It can mean make in the sense of make somebody happy, but it doesn't mean make in the sense of turn a lump of gold into a crown. This looks a bit not Greek, and therefore possibly Italian. It's the faccio word, not the tithemi word. And what's going on here is anybody's guess. There's no real evidence, I think, for Oscan using some kind of, inserting a vowel, as it were, before clusters like S and T. Is that right? And yet, this is the sort of context where you might have expected a double S. So is this some attempt to represent, I mean, who knows what it is, but EI seems to represent the vowel that's written in the local alphabet with an I acute, that's to say some kind of I sound. It's far too early, I think, for any kind of prophetic vowel, but you can make of this what you will. But there are some inscriptions like this, apparently in Greek, but clearly with some Oscan stuff going on behind the scenes. So, what do we need in order for these possible scenarios to be put properly to the test? Well, first of all, what we need is a systematic, complete collection of all the surviving literary and epigraphic materials, especially from the 4th century BC onwards. Does the documentary evidence really support any of these hypotheses? Something else that a properly collected and analysed corpus that goes down into the Roman period might help us with is to provide some kind of platform for establishing just how much, if any, of the Greek that still survives in Calabria, in modern Calabria, that's the toe bit, and rather more vigorously in the Salento region, the heel bit. Is any of this really of ancient as opposed to medieval origin? We know that the whole region was recolonized, partly from the Peloponnese, but also from elsewhere, in the 10th and the 11th centuries AD. And I guess one reflection of that is that the modern name of Tarentum, clearly, Taranto, comes from the Greek taras or tarantas, its medieval form, and not from the Latin name. So clearly there's a huge, as it were, Byzantine input, but is there any residual ancient Doric stuff going on? Very, very hard to know that. I think we need to know whether Doric survives in any credible kind of way through into the later Roman period before we can start to answer that. And the only way to do that is to collect the stuff and look at it. Okay, so clearly a lot still needs to be done if our understanding of Greek in Italy is going to reach the same level as for Sicily and lots of other places in mainland Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. Apart from the need for an up-to-date collection and classification of the available data, and fresh scrutiny of that data to question the hypotheses various people have advanced, there are, I think, probably other possibilities. And one very obvious one is the role of this region and Sicily in the development of the characteristic form of literary Doric that was used for choral lyric poetry in the archaic and early classical periods. Poets came from all different regions of Greece, but a lot of them actually came to Sicily or Italy to spend time at the courts of various local tyrants, so-called monarchs. So it's highly likely that the dialects of this region had some kind of input into or effect on the language of choral lyric. So that's something else, something quite different, that might be usefully investigated. But whatever directions the project eventually takes on the Greek front, we're certainly looking forward to a fruitful 4-year period of research and innovation. Thank you.